Start Over Strong, Life After a DUI, a podcast for people, not offenders. Brought to you by Smart Start, the nation's most trusted, judgment-free ignition interlock provider.
Hello and welcome to Stigma Free IID. My name is Morgan Ryan, and we are here to change the stigma around all things alcohol, recovery, and the ignition interlock space. Today, I am so excited to have a very special guest with us. His name is Satchel Stillwell, and Satchel is the founder and lead therapist of a very profound and different approach to therapy called Remnant Recovery. Satchel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I normally don't reference my notes, but I'm going to today. I want to make sure that I hit on all the items. But first, I want you to tell me a little bit about your background and how Remnant Recovery came to be.
So I started working as a master's level therapist in 2013. I was working private practice in the evenings. And then in 2014, I began working at a treatment center as an intern. So doing primarily individual counseling there, group counseling there, and also running a multi-family therapy program there. So I was actually able to develop that, write the content, the curriculum for that, and got to run that both on the male side and the female side. And so I worked inpatient for 7 years. I became the clinical director there. And then in 2020, I transitioned to just doing private practice only. And so that's when I really started to kind of focus more of my energy on that.
Okay. Sounds like a very extensive list of credentials.
It's busy.
Yeah, it sounds busy, which is good. 2022, quite a year.
It was.
You kind of go on your own.
Right.
Therapy is an interesting term when we're talking about something like car breathalyzers and ignition interlock devices. In the IID space, we see a range of individuals who end up having to have one. Those who have truly made a mistake, those who are subsequent offenders, those who may or may not be suffering or struggling with alcohol use disorder, AUD. But the IID is there not as a punishment. It's there as a tool to change daily behavior. So therapy, daily disciplines, getting your dignity back, diagnosing the problem and the root of it is a critical part of this conversation. But what you're doing today in Remnant Recovery, that approach to therapy, can you explain to me what makes that different and how that's evolved?
Yeah. So one of the things I noticed when I was working in the industry space and the treatment world is that there's kind of this gap that exists between people that need inpatient treatment versus people that need outpatient treatment. Okay. And then there's people that maybe have insurance or they have cash or maybe they don't have either, or there's some kind of mix of the two. And what I noticed is that there's a lot of people that wouldn't be willing to go away for inpatient treatment for whatever reason, maybe because of work obligations or travel or something like that. Something would keep them, and they might not be as open to going to like a 90-day inpatient facility, for example.
Like a rehab?
Like a rehab facility.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
So your practice as well, do you focus specifically on those that are struggling with alcoholism? I know one of the bigger differentiators in terms of how you've evolved treatment for that specifically is you do kind of treat the family. Mm-hmm. Do you focus on other areas, or is your specialty primarily alcohol?
I focus on several other areas. I see individuals ages 6 and up, but Remnant Recovery is specifically designed to treat the whole family system because I believe that alcoholism is a family system disease, not only because it affects the individual, but it affects the entire family system with regard to symptoms and just the ramifications of the disease itself. And so that's another problem that I noticed when I looked at the industry as a whole was that the individual was getting treatment, and that was great, but the individual would often return to the family system, and there's something that we call homeostasis. So basically this idea that the individual goes into inpatient treatment and they get better, and now they're at a new norm where they're sober and they're in this recovery mode, but they go back to the family system, and the family system has kind of stagnated. They've stayed here, and they haven't done the recovery work that they needed to do. And so when this person gets back into that family system, a lot of times what we see is they regress. And so there's this homeostatic sort of drop or dip that occurs, and then they often go back to using again and relapse. And sometimes that's within a 2-week time span after getting out of treatment.
2 weeks?
Yes.
That's heartbreaking.
Yes.
To hear. I admire the acknowledgement of the gap and changing the approach to fix the problem. My personal story, having a loved one that suffered with AUD, still does, understanding my part and my responsibility, taking accountability and reading and all the things I needed to do was a big significant factor for me, and feeling just more supportive for that individual and also more in control maybe of the outcome, which, it sounds like for you, treating families in as young as 6, what's that process look like? Is there a stipulation where they come in for X amount of days, or is this an ongoing solution? Because I've heard that really you can't cure it. And how does your, approach work? Is there a timeline?
There is a timeline. So strategically, what I wanted to do was really establish 2 different timelines. But initially, my idea was a 6-month duration of treatment. And that's 6 clinical hours per week for a duration of 6 months. And that's an extremely long time when it comes to, comparative treatment models that are out there. But the reason I wanted to approach it with that allotment of time is because I'm treating the whole family system. I'm not just treating an individual. So that allows for an individual hour of counseling, a marriage counseling session, as well as a family counseling session for each. Usually in the evening is when these happen. So it would be 2 different evenings per each week. And what's really cool about Remnant, initially my idea was to bring treatment to the home.
Oh,
so not like an IOP where you go to a facility, and not like an inpatient facility where you go and you stay there, but actually, somebody that comes out to you and sort of brings treatment to your door. And that's extremely innovative because that doesn't really exist in the treatment space at all.
Sure. It's one thing to be in the environment, and then another thing to be in your true inside the 4 walls of your home.
Exactly.
So it is revolutionary, essentially. Do you find that there's more willingness or lack of willingness?
I see more willingness because people are more comfortable in their home environments.
Okay.
And it also gives me as a clinician an inside look at what is their home environment like, just from the standpoint of just the cleanliness. Is it chaotic? Is it stable? It's really interesting because when you're working inpatient treatment, you're only experiencing them in the inpatient facility, or when you're working in an office, you're only experiencing them for that hour within the office.
Wow.
And so when you're in their space, they're acting a lot more natural, they're acting a lot more comfortable within their own space because they're used to that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's huge. It sounds like it's really revolutionary what you're doing. And I hope people are listening and that you're writing about this and talking about this. And I know your business is going to continue to grow. Do you believe in intervention in terms of handheld breathalyzers? We at SmartStart, we have a, portable alcohol monitoring device, the PAM. We have a breath check, and it is a small handheld breathalyzer. And we very much believe in intervention at that level. I've seen individuals who have used this breathalyzer to give to their child on prom night. Women who carry them, who go have wine with their friends during lunch, to avoid a DUI, ending up in a situation with an ignition interlock device. But in terms of this overlap with intervention and something like a breathalyzer that actually facilitates reporting to a monitoring authority instead of maybe something I bought on Amazon, that the accuracy may not be there. Do you believe in intervention like that? And is that a part of your program today?
Absolutely. So I'm a huge proponent of that from the accountability standpoint.
Okay.
And so when you talked about, behavioral change, one of the things that really I wanted to speak on is I look at, there's behavioral change, there's cognitive change, and then there's affect change, so emotional change. And all 3 of those areas have to be addressed. And so I think with the interlock devices and things like that, it really addresses the behavioral change because it creates a system of accountability. And so, for example, I've got a client right now who's got one, and he has to blow in it 6 times a day throughout the day.
Okay.
And that's really beneficial for him. And the only criticism I have is that the judge decided to have a very short time period of which he's on this interlock device. And I kind of was hoping that it would have been a longer duration just because he's entering into college right now. And so there's a whole lot of temptation with the fraternity and just the pressure to social drink and all that good stuff. So, but for the time being, it creates this great system of accountability because there is no way he can really cheat this system. He has to blow into this 6 times a day, and it's got a camera on it. So it, it records him and all that good stuff. And so that at least, creates this really good stopgap. And as a therapist, it creates a unique opportunity for me to possibly do the work. So even if he's reluctant to get sober, this might give us enough time to where he might have some contemplation and maybe change that idea.
Right. And changing the behavior is a big part of it. So I recently sat down in a 2-part series with an individual named Peter Lochnick. He's in recovery, super humble individual, phenomenal interview. If you haven't listened to it yet, highly recommend that 2-part series. We talked about commitment to the cover-up. And when you are the alcohol, you're not drinking intentionally to hurt the other person, but you are committed to the cover-up. And you may think you're fooling people around you, and you might get away with some things. But there is a intense commitment to the cover-up. He talked about slugging hot vodka out of a water bottle in the garage and hiding and things. And so intervention with a mobile device or a breathalyzer like Breath Check is a great way for maybe a spouse to also see accountability because they have been likely subjected to commitment to the cover-up. Do you agree with that statement?
I do. And another thing that you just said that I think is really important to consider is taking the wife or the spouse out of the key role of responsibility for holding somebody accountable is essential, because when all that responsibility is placed on that person, they feel an intense amount of pressure to kind of manage their recovery.
Sure.
And so I'm a big proponent of not only like getting a sponsor, but also having a third party like that that's able to, monitor effectively. It takes a lot of that pressure and that responsibility off of the wife or the spouse.
Yeah. And I think it leads to resentment.
Right.
And that there's this natural desire to control and fix. And that's not healthy for any spouse that may have a spouse who is dealing with alcoholism. So I want to switch gears for a second, because we're sort of tiptoeing on this line in terms of how we talk to friends and family about this. So I'm just curious, how do you coach wives, family members, children, or someone who may have a DUI that has an ignition interlock device? How do you tell them this is how you talk to people about, I have a DUI, and maybe when is it appropriate or not appropriate to tell people?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on the context. So if you're speaking about like confronting your own spouse with something like that, or if you're talking about, speaking to an employer or something like that, you have to have an appreciation for the context and the gravity of that situation.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of blaming that goes on. There's a lot of gaslighting that goes on. There's a lot of blame shifting that goes on with situations like that. So whenever you can present, logical data without emotion. For example, I'll give you a good example. This is a funny one that comes to me, but a session that I was in one time, the wife was talking about going to the garage and how she found empty vodka bottles and she found vomit on the ground in the garage. And the husband was, adamant about, I'm not drinking. And it was kind of like, but
Denial, and right, these are the facts.
But these, this set of data says something that's different than what you're saying. And so I think it's harder to kind of deny and like rationalize, justify, and move around that when there's actual data that supports, actually, I think you might have relapsed, and hey, we need to have a conversation about that. But having a third party like a therapist is a good idea for a situation like that, or even an interventionist, because again, it kind of involves that third party that doesn't have any buy-in or skin in the game, so to speak. So they can remain emotionally objective, whereas maybe the spouse is not able to do that because they're hurt and they're offended at what's gone on.
Yeah, no, of course. Do you have to tell your employer that you got a DUI?
Well, I could only answer that question relating to the state of Texas, because that's limit, my limit of knowledge on it. But there's something called the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. And so what that does is creates a system of privacy for somebody, that if they wanted to say enter treatment, they could do that without disclosing that to their employer.
Okay.
And so that's actually a really good layer of protection there, because that could be seen as anything from, a health issue, something, completely unrelated to alcoholism. And so it does create a layer of, HIPAA protected privacy. At the same time, if you're asking me one-to-one about that, I would probably say it would be best to be honest with your employer about that, because I think that there's other things that are going to be required of that individual from a legal standpoint, if they had to, miss work or leave work early to go to a court date or something like that, or to meet with a probation officer, if things like that are going to be kind of a continuing theme throughout their course of employment, it's probably a good idea to be honest with your employer. I'm a big proponent of that, but I will say that each individual has that option with the FMLA.
Okay. Yeah. And it sounds like every state is different. Know your laws, look them up before you feel obligated. And a vulnerable conversation is maybe an opportunity to show humility, honesty, and accountability for your actions. And so it sounds like navigating those, but understanding first potential ramifications and what that relationship is like with your employer or your spouse or your friends and family is really kind of mission critical. Yes. Thank you for helping us guide our listeners through that. And you said something I would just want to reiterate. You said having a factual conversation without emotions is, maybe just taking a logical and sort of mid-tone approach to admission or when you're talking about it. In terms of someone who maybe had a DUI 10 years ago, I know likely they're obligated to disclose that on a future employer resume or things of that nature because there are background checks. How do we as a society bring less stigma and create a more maybe judgment-free zone for those who have had a DUI, who may or may not be still struggling with alcoholism or not? Maybe they're not an alcoholic. What are your ideas or any concepts you have in terms of getting the market and us as individuals to realize that a person isn't defined maybe by their mistake, and that there is life after mistakes? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, and it's going to sound like promotion of self, but I'm a big fan of mental health, and I'm a big fan of that space. And so I think as an employer, it would be important to understand where that individual is in their recovery process.
Okay.
So understanding, was this a one-time thing that happened, this kind of anomaly, and it never was an issue again? Or did you have alcoholism leading up to that event, and then that happened, and that was a major wake-up call, like a rock bottom moment for you, and then you started pursuing, an active recovery experience after that date, So it's like, as an employer, I think it would be very important to know that information, because that gives me kind of a little bit more data in my decision-making process in terms of hiring somebody.
Do you think that people who have had a DUI are discriminated against if they disclose it?
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, because of the stigma that exists around it, which, ironically is exactly why people don't seek help. So it's like, it's the shame around the disease of alcoholism that prevents people from ever seeking help. But it's the exact thing that needs to be clinically addressed in order for them to get better. So it's kind of this vicious cycle, because the very thing that they need to do is the thing that they're afraid to do.
Yeah. And
I've always thought about it like, there's a spectrum of pride and humility, right? And it's like, to self-disclose, to go to an AA meeting or something like that, I think what's so profound about that is it takes a lot of courage to do that, because you're stepping in a room and you're identifying yourself in this way, and you're disclosing this to a random group of people that you may have never met before. And that takes a lot of humility to do that.
Yeah.
And this disease does not want to be treated. So it's the default, I think, is to stay prideful and stay in the space of, I don't want people to know that about me. But it's antithetical to the recovery process.
I see. So not being afraid to bring it to light. I'm personally very pro-therapy. Most people in my circle are pro-therapy. And I love what you're touching on, which is this a level of accountability and humility, and maybe almost an excitement to treat it, kind of shifting that mindset. In terms of car breathalyzers, just want to kind of circle back to that. Do you think that car breathalyzers, ignition interlock devices, while generally speaking, they're put on, 6 months, 18 months, 3+ years, it's always different depending on the aggravating factors with your DUI. If you're a first time offender, what state you're in, all those things will determine the requirement, but they're usually put on at, post DUI. Do you believe that IIDs work, and do you consider them almost a form of therapy?
I believe that they work. I believe that they're an effective measure or method of accountability.
Okay.
So I think that they affect behavioral change. I wouldn't say that they're an effective form of therapy, though.
Okay.
I would say that in addition to something else would be most beneficial for somebody. So a program of recovery, somebody that's doing therapy, and then having something like that as an intervening, measure of accountability, I think is really great, because it's treating all these different issues as opposed to just treating one issue.
Okay. So what about folks who are watching this, listening to this, and they just want access to you? They want to have a conversation with you. They want to connect with you. Maybe they do have an individual in their family who suffers with AUD. They want help, but they don't live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Do you do Zoom calls? And is there a way to provide Remnant Recovery's revolutionary approach to therapy for people that are out of state?
Well, per the terms of my licensure, I can only provide clinical services for people that are in the state of Texas, unfortunately, but they can find me by going to remnantrecovery.com. They can read more about myself and, the type of therapy I provide. There's some resources on there as well, some videos and things like that, so they can kind of get, a little bit more information about me.
Yeah, that's great. In terms of anyone that might be struggling, or that has a loved one that's struggling, is there anything you want to leave them with today in terms of encouragement or next steps?
Yeah, I would absolutely say seek help, reach out, because help is definitely available. And even if financial options are limited, even if you don't have insurance or you don't have cash, there's still a lot of programs out there that are nonprofits that exist, especially within the DFW area, that can help people. And so, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't let that fear and that stigma or that shame prevent you from reaching out for help.
That's great. Anything else you want to share with our listeners today about Remnant Recovery, what you guys are doing, or anything else you'd like to leave them with?
I don't think so.
Okay, I think we covered it. Yeah, we did. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining the show today. Wonderful conversation around how we are breaking the stigma, having open and honest conversations, and then using technology like Ignition Interlock devices along with therapy to help those in society who may be struggling with a problem. I am Morgan Ryan. Please follow our website, www.smartstartinc.com, for more information. Please also visit Remnant Recovery if you need help or you have a family member or loved one that needs help. You can also get your first 2 payments free if you need an IID with coupon code STIGMAFREE. Thank you for joining the show today, folks.